Let's go, everyone. It is time to talk some draft. I'm going to have Jordan Elliott joining me. There he is. How are you doing today, Jordan?
I am fantastic, dude. We are 48 hours away from either a very happy moment or a very chaotic moment, which for me it's one and the same. I'm having a great time on Thursday no matter what.
Right, absolutely. So we figured we'd get cracking with this. We do a little draft Q&A. Obviously, we're doing so much talking about the quarterbacks at this point. We may answer one or two quarterback questions, but the whole point of this is we want to focus on other prospects. We want to talk about other guys so we can start focusing, because there are 2 through 7 rounds of the draft as well. It's not just the pick at 3. So with that being said, drop your questions in the chats. We're going on IG, we're on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and so we'll do our best to manage it all. But how are you doing, Jordan? How are you feeling? The draft is 48 hours away. Is the anxiety levels rising? How are we doing today? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that nervousness is fair. I think we're in for a surprise, regardless of who the pick is at number 3, because it could be anyone. It could be Lance, could be Fields, could be Mac Jones. We talked about a scenario yesterday where, well, what happens if the New York Jets take Fields? I saw Pete Prisco put out a mock today doing that same scenario, which is pretty interesting this close to the draft, especially for CBS reporters and things like that. But it is a mock at the end of the day. So it's interesting. We'll see how it is. But we have one of our first questions here on YouTube. So I'll get this pulled up. And I think this fits perfectly for Jordan. Christian wants to know Holland from Oregon. So this is DB question. Holland from Oregon or Molden from Washington. Pac-12 loaded question. These are safeties. I would say Molden's probably like a second round, more of a fit. Holland's a third.
Yeah, I would say, I definitely have a higher grade on Molden for sure.
But go ahead and talk about those two prospects real quick.
So I like Molden a lot, admittedly. It's not just like a bias thing where it's like, oh, I like this player. It's purely just from watching him play. I think he's very good. I think that he is this perfect mold of this kind of player that can kind of bounce around a secondary a little bit. He's played a little bit at safety. He's been phenomenal. He's arguably been the best slot corner in college football the last 2 seasons. I think he's capable of playing outside, and I just really trust the pipeline of defensive backs that have come out of Washington. There's a pattern of success. And again, you don't want to scout the school, but what you do want to take note of is that they're clearly doing something with these defensive backs that is translating to success at the NFL level, coming in from high school, learning whatever they're learning under Jimmy Lake and that defensive staff at Washington, and it's translating at the next level. So I would lean Molden. I like Holland too. I like Oregon secondary. I thought was very underrated the last couple seasons. Not many people watch Pac-12 ball, but Cal had a really good secondary last year as well. Like, these guys are not getting the exposure they deserve, really. But Molden is a guy that I think sets himself apart from that Pac-12. I don't want to say slander, but just the lack of respect the Pac-12 gets. I think he would have played in any of the Power 5 conferences and been as good of a player as he is. And the way I look at Molden specifically for the 49ers is he gives them so much versatility, because should the Niners, who have a group of players in the secondary that are all on one-year deals with the exception of Emmanuel Mosley and Jimmy Ward. So you have Tart, you have K1, you have Verrett, you have all these guys on one-year deals. If K1 were to hypothetically leave, you could slot Molden in as your slot corner moving forward, which is essentially a starting position in the modern NFL with defenses running out a lot of nickel and a lot more dime quarter looks, a lot less base defense. Or hypothetically, maybe Jaquaski Tart plays very well. He moves on, and the 49ers under DeMeco Ryans branch off a little bit from that cover three, single high cover three shell that they ran a lot under Sala, and they start running a little bit more too high, and then you move Molden to more of a, I don't want to say a safety, but kind of a hybrid that can move around a little bit. It gives them a lot more options, in my opinion, and he's just a damn good player. I'll say really quickly, he compares very favorably to Jimmy Ward for me. Jimmy Ward is 5'10", 190, I think. 5'11", 190, and Molden is 5'10", 191. They're almost identical in size, and the thing that sets them apart for me is the open field tackling ability. Any 49ers fan that watches Jimmy Ward knows the routes that he takes to the ball carrier and the efficiency that he tackles with when it's really just him and another guy on an island, and if he misses, that player's taking it to the house or for at least an explosive play. He's very good at making sure that those guys aren't going to get past him. And I see the same thing with Molden, where he's not only taking great routes to the ball carrier and limiting their gains, but he's just very efficient when he's left on an island. And he has a little bit of, he's got a little bit of nastiness to him. He can lay down the wood pretty well for a guy that's sitting at 190 pounds.
Yeah, so those are two guys that can provide quite a bit of versatility, which is something that you've been championing for some time, and I fully agree with 100% that with the abilities that these offensive players have these days, with how athletic they are, how gifted you are, you need guys that can play all over the field. You need to have them to be able to play multiple levels and do different things, and both of those guys are a fit. It's funny with Javon Holland because one of the first times I really watched him was when I was scouting Ayuk, and they had a bunch of corners, and they would trot out, I think there was number 4, number 6. They trot out a bunch of different guys, and no one had an answer for Brandon Ayuk. But it was Javon Holland, who was a safety. They had to bring him down and put him over on Ayuk. He's the only one who did okay against Brandon Ayuk in that game against Oregon. I think that was back to 2019 or what have you. It was a while back. And he's since grown and become a better player. So yeah, those are two guys that would be a great fit. And you've been on Molden all offseason from the very, very beginning. That's definitely one of your guys. But in regards to the running back position, what are your thoughts on the possibility of Najee Harris coming? Do you think he falls to 43, or do you think that's something where a trade would have to occur if that was actually going to happen? And if so, would you want to do that?
So really quickly, I fundamentally think that taking a running back in the first round is ill-advised. And secondly, trading up for one is very ill-advised. You're giving up significant capital because you'd have to move from 43 to probably the mid-20s. I wouldn't do it personally, but I will say, like Najee is from the Bay, went to high school in Antioch, local guy, really wants to be a part of the Niners, and he's a very good player. So I wouldn't be upset at it if they were to do it. I wouldn't be, up in arms. But just from a pure team building standpoint, if you're going to move up and give up that kind of capital, it would have to be for a pass rusher, or it would have to be for like a corner or wide receiver, in my opinion. And there's so many guys that would still be on the board, in my opinion, that it would be very hard for me to understand why they would make that move up. And again, Najee could come in and he could be a 3-down back. He could be a guy that's going to rush for 1,500 yards for the next 5 years for Kyle. And people will be like, hey, it doesn't matter what you gave up for him. You got a guy. That's your guy. I just don't like it from a team building standpoint because I just think that running backs are so easily replaceable and they get so much wear and tear and their shelf life is so much shorter than every other position that I just would have a hard time giving up that kind of capital. Because again, you have to look at down the road too. They don't have a first round pick next year. They don't have a first round pick the year after. So unless hypothetically, like I know there's rumors going around today that they're looking to move Jimmy, if they were able to get like New England's second round pick, which falls 3 picks after the 49ers at 46, and you moved 43, 46, and maybe like a day 3 pick or something, and you moved up and got him, I would feel a little bit better about that than if they were to move 43, like their second next year, plus something else, which they would likely have to do. Because then you're going into the 2022 draft, you're not picking until round 3. Hopefully it's going to be the last pick of the 3rd round because the 49ers hopefully win the Super Bowl next year. And at the very least, you're probably going to be in the playoffs if everybody stays healthy. So it's still going to be in the back end of that 3rd round. And as good as the team looks now, the best way to stay competitive is to constantly be refreshing that pipeline of younger players. And if you're eliminating your ability to do that, to move up for a position where, again, Najee Harris is a great player, and I am a huge fan of his, but the 49ers were able to get Raheem Mostert for nothing, and he was averaging 6.5 yards per carry. They had Jeff Wilson out there looking like a starting caliber running back, got him for nothing. And I just think that there are so many guys that you could take on day 3, back end of day 2, maybe, like if they took a Chuba Hubbard out of Oklahoma State, I'd like that. Jamar Jefferson, Chris Evans out of Michigan. Like, there's so many guys I look at where you're not only going to not have to spend a high pick, but you're also not going to have to mortgage your future. And that's what really gets me. If Najee's there at 43 and they take him, I would have no issue with it. I'd be like, okay, you know what? Like, that's a sweet spot for a good running back. That's around where Nick Chubb, Dalvin Cook, Jonathan Taylor, Cam Akers, a lot of these guys got taken. But giving up the future capital for a position that really doesn't have that much longevity is where I would have a hard time accepting that, really.
And I would have to agree with you as well in that regard. I think if the 49ers somehow got their hands on Najee Harris, that would be a lot of fun. I mean, it would be just really cool to think about all the different things you could do with that scheme, with that offense, with the weapons. You add them to Kittle, Ayuk, Debo, all those guys, and then you put them behind an offensive line that features Trent Williams, Alex Mack, and all the guys. So, but I would have to agree with you. It just feels like for a coach who seems to have figured out a philosophy for striking gold in later rounds, it just seems like, and especially with the other running backs in this class, right? So, like, we like the top 3, Javonte, Etienne, and Harris, but there's a lot of really good running backs that you can be had later, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and you could probably still get some decent production out of them. So it seems like there'd be a great opportunity there to really use that position of potentially a 2nd round and or a trade up to be able to maybe maximize the positional value a little bit better, which is essentially what you're trying to say. So I would have to agree with that. I think it would be fantastic to have Najee Harris on the squad. I think it really would. It would be a really fun scenario, but I think with the positional value of the running back, you could find something else. And to kind of transition into that, on Instagram, we have a question from Christian, who's saying, are we taking wide receiver or a cornerback in the 2nd round? So assuming that we stay at 43, and the 49ers are in the business of drafting a wide receiver or a cornerback in the 2nd round, who are some guys that you would like to see at that position?
So I think it really depends what they do at quarterback. If they take a Justin Fields or a Trey Lance, a guy with a big arm that you could sort of start running a little bit more 3 wide receiver sets with, I would be encouraging them to take another wide receiver to add to that group that already has Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. I really like De'Ami Brown out of North Carolina. That'd be the first guy I'd throw out there. I think his skill set would fit in tremendously with those guys. And again, I preach versatility and being able to move guys around. I think that if you had De'Ami Brown and you added him to Ayuk and Debo, you then could run any of the 3 out of the slot. You could run any of that jet motion, fly sweep, a lot of that pre-snap stuff Kyle likes to run with any of the 3. And it puts defenses in a position where they have to account for all 3 doing so. I'm a big fan of Elijah Moore. If he were to end up there out of Ole Miss, I think he would fit that prototypical slot receiver role with a little bit more upside. And he just has sure hands, great route runner, explosive with the ball in his hands, and just a reliable target and a guy that I feel very confident is going to translate to the next level. I really like Rondale Moore. Anybody who's watched him, the only downside is that he's about 5'7", I think is what he ultimately got measured at. But the guy plays like he's 6'5". He has tremendous speed, insane burst, and he's strong as hell for a guy that's that size. So again, you could kind of work in a lot of that same stuff that they do with Debo, you could do with him. So it might be a question of, is it too redundant to have another Debo, or is it going to magnify your offense and amplify it by increasing the amount of Debos you have on the field ultimately? So those would be the guys that I would really look at receiver. Corner, I like both the Georgia corners, Campbell and Stokes. I think both of those guys would fit that kind of area, or they'll fall to that kind of area in the draft. And I think they both present tremendous upside, plus the ability to not be pressured to come in and start right away because you have Mosley and Verrett locked up and K1 in the slot currently. Greg Newsome is another guy. I know that's your guy out of Northwestern. He's somebody that I definitely, since you put me on him, I have grown very fond of. And I think that he would be a steal at 43 if he's still there personally. And then Molden, again, is another guy. I know we just talked about him, but if Molden was still there at 43, I would run to the podium with the card and not think twice about it. So those would probably be the main group of players at that area that I would like personally.
Yeah, I like all those guys. I think a fun scenario, I know we talked about, potentially if you somehow make a package to get it back into the, bottom of the first round and take Najee Harris. That was what we just kind of floated out there. I've been kind of messing with this in my head. I don't know if it's necessarily a need, but it would be a lot of fun to have this many weapons on Ayuk, Debo, and Kittle, and a great offensive line and a healthy stable of running backs. If for whatever reason the 49ers see this player fall, and let's say he falls into the 20s, and then they're able to make that deal of somehow getting back into the first, it would be so fun to see Rashad Bateman on this team. I think he's going to go a lot higher than many people anticipate, but Rashad Bateman is just like the perfect blend of speed and just ability as a wide receiver. He has the ability to run the entire route tree and do it in a way where he knows how to manipulate defenders with his speed. That's more, it's a pipe dream. I don't see it happening. I don't see it falling. I don't see the 49ers trading up and doing it. It's just something that I like to dream about sometimes at night. It would be really fun to see this offense with all these weapons, including Rashad Bateman. It just feels like there would be so much opportunities for Kyle Shanahan to continue to maximize this offense. But I think someone who could be available. Is maybe Terrace Marshall, which you may have mentioned, or Kadarius Toney. I know we talked about Kadarius Toney, not the most positive light, but I feel like he could be available. I feel like he has the tape, at least from what he did in college, to be a first-round pick. There might be other circumstances that cause him to fall a little bit on top of just the other talent at the wide receiver position. He could be a potential fit for the 49ers, especially with all the different things he can do out of the backfield. That would be pretty interesting. I'm a big Amon-Ra St. Brown guy. I think he's worthy of being a second-round pick. It might be a little rich. Could be an opportunity where you could actually drop back maybe 5 to 10 spots, get some assets, and then take your guy. But those are some guys that I like kind of in that range, at least from the wide receiver standpoint. You mentioned, both of the Georgia cornerbacks. They'll probably be available. They'll probably be there. I don't know if I would totally pull the trigger on that. Again, I feel like this is a situation where that second pick, it just seems like there's so much you can do. You can trade back. You could move up and package it for someone that you really want. But if they're looking to do more of a trade back scenario, I've been a big Ifitu Melifonwu guy. If the 49ers can move back a couple picks, 5 to 10 picks, grab Ifitu, stack maybe a pick in the 80s, and maximize some of the value in that part of the draft, that would be a lot of fun. So those are some guys that I think would fit what we're trying to do, at least as what we're trying to forecast the scheme to be, because at this point we don't really know. So we'll find out. We'll find out. But I mean, after that, there's not a ton of cornerbacks in this class. So if the 49ers are going to get a cornerback, I would have to think they would want to do it within the first 3 rounds. Anything past that, I feel like you're seeing a pretty substantial drop off. But here's a question from Twitter. Do you think, and this is related to the draft in the sense that Julio Jones is on the clock, essentially to be traded? They are listening to offers. They're seeing what's out there. Do you see a situation where Julio Jones gets traded? And if so, where do you think would a good landing spot for him would be?
Yes, I do. And if I'm Atlanta, as much as I think Julio Jones has been the best wide receiver in football since he came in the league. I think he's the most complete. I just think he's so dynamic. But I also think that he is he's old and he gets hurt a lot. And it's at the point now where you are kind of looking at the future, because I don't know that Atlanta is in a position where they're going to be competing right away, because it's really weird. They have a good offense and they have a good quarterback still, but their defense is a little ways away, but they're picking at 4. So hypothetically, if they weren't ready to take the quarterback now and they think Matt Ryan's going to be around for a little bit, you take I want to say Pitts really badly, but you could also take Jamar Chase. You have your pick of the receivers. Quarterbacks are going 1, 2, 3 almost assuredly. So you could take a Jamar Chase, you could take a Kyle Pitts, and then you move Julio to a team. The team that I would really want to see him go to is I want to see him go to Baltimore, because I want to see what Lamar Jackson looks like with a real bona fide wide receiver one that's a dominant X receiver that can line up and dominate from anywhere on the field, but also give you, no offense to Marquise Brown or any of the tight ends, Mark Andrews is good. They're not Julio Jones level players. And I think that that's one thing that we haven't really been able to evaluate Lamar Jackson in a fair way, because he hasn't really had that dynamic number one receiver. So it's kind of a win-win in my view in that situation. And I believe Baltimore is picking 24th, 23rd, somewhere in the early 20s. It would probably cost that to acquire Julio Jones at this point. But if I'm them, I'd be making that push now, because that could be the piece that puts this offense over the top. And then if you're Atlanta, you're able to take that wide receiver early, and then you have that draft capital in the first where you could add a player to your defense. Maybe Azeez is there. Maybe a Trayvon Moehrig is there. A guys that we really like would still be there in the early 20s, and you're coming away from this with a younger player. And again, it's unfair to expect that even a guy like Kyle Pitts, who's been very highly touted, or Jamar Chase, who had an insane season at 19, it's going to be really hard to expect them to be a Julio-level player. But it's realistic to look at it and say this is the best move we can do for a team, is to have them and pair them with Calvin Ridley, who's been phenomenal. Honestly, I think he doesn't get talked about enough how good Calvin Ridley really is. And then you're left in a position where you're kind of revamping that youth at receiver and for your skill positions. And then Matt Ryan for the next couple seasons would have the ability to thrive at quarterback still. And you're also setting yourself up by getting your team younger and building for life beyond this core of Matt Ryan and Julio Jones and all these guys that have been there for a little over a decade at this point. So, yeah, I could definitely see it happening. Again, Baltimore would be number 1 on my list. Number 2, I don't know that they would trade within the conference or if the team would sack up and do it, but I'd love to see him go to Green Bay too. I'm a big Aaron Rodgers guy. We're both Cal guys. Had him and Devontae Adams together. I mean, it'd be scary. As a 49ers fan, I would fucking hate it personally. But as a fan of football, I would be ecstatic to see what he would look like with Aaron Rodgers throwing him the ball. So those would probably be number 1 and 2 on my wish list. I just hope he wouldn't get sent to a team that doesn't have a very good quarterback, and he's just going to be kind of wasted away. I don't know that they would move another first-round pick in back-to-back years to do so, but Buffalo would be another one where if you had Julio Jones and Stephon Diggs, all of a sudden you're cooking with a really good wide receiver core. I would like to see him go to a team that has a dynamic quarterback, and those 3 teams all have dynamic quarterbacks, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of those selections. And of course, you make really good points for all of those situations. I just want Julio to get a ship, man. I just want him to win a championship. He's one of the best wide receivers that I've ever seen. And he's just a freak. And so if we could get him into a place that would really maximize his talents, I agree. I would absolutely hate as a 49ers fan if he landed with Green Bay. But from a fantasy standpoint, I own quite a few shares of Julio Jones. So that being the case, I wouldn't mind that at all. So not a bad situation. Could you see a situation though where Kyle Shanahan falls in love with Amari Rodgers, Clemson wide receiver, had a great Senior Bowl, balled out, was a little bit quiet during the actual season, but that showed quite some promise during the Senior Bowl. Do you think that could be a Kyle Shanahan guy in your opinion?
Yeah, I definitely could see that. I think that he possesses a lot of that ability to find the soft spot in the zone, and then he's dynamic after the catch. And, it's really tough to evaluate because I think the number one thing that Kyle evaluated was route running for a while. I think that's why they gave so much money to Pierre Garçon. I think that's why they moved up for Dante Pettis when they did. I think that's why they really like Brandon Ayuk. I think that Debo is more of just hey, I think this guy is a unicorn in the sense that, Richard Sherman described him as Marshawn Lynch playing receiver. So Debo is a better route runner than people give him credit for. So route running is the first thing I look at. And I think that Amari Rodgers is a very good route runner. The yak thing does get a little overblown. I think the offense was so predicated on yards after the catch just because that was kind of the most efficient way with the way the offense was constructed, and with Jimmy Garoppolo at the helm, it was going to be the best way to maximize the offense. So while I think the yak is important, I don't think it's the end-all, be-all, but I do think that Amari Rodgers has good yak ability, but his route running is very crisp. He's a smart player. Brad watched him at the Senior Bowl in person in Mobile. He made some great plays from the cut-ups I got with the virtual credentials. I really like him, and I know it's not Amari Rodgers, but while we're talking about Clemson wide receivers, I really like Cornell Powell too. The guy is built like Anquan Bolden. He's
huge.
I hate to put it this way. After watching the way DK's ripped it up the last couple seasons, if you see a guy that's built like that, that's that physical, take a chance on him. Like, worst case, they're David Boston. They end up just not being very good, and they're just this big buff dude that's not doing much. But at the end of the day, like, it's worth taking a risk on that kind of physicality. So I could see Kyle falling in love with either of those Clemson receivers, but I do think Amari Rodgers fits more of what he likes. I think he likes those technicians, those smart, heady players over the bigger, strong, fast guys. I don't think that matters to him nearly as much as the cerebral capacity. So yeah, I definitely think that could happen.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I could see him falling with the little buff Cornell Powell. I mean, that he's built like a tank for
he's
his
yoked,
size.
dude.
He is yoked, but I do feel like there is a couple round talent difference between the two. At least watching them both practice at the same time, you could tell one carried a lot more juice than the other. But I think the points that you make are correct, and that could absolutely be the case. So this is a guy that we haven't talked about too much. Jamin Davis out of Kentucky. He's a linebacker. He's came on pretty strong within this process as of late based on some of the testing that he has done. Have you had an opportunity to really dive into the tape much? And if you have, what are some of your first impressions?
I haven't gotten in as much as I would like, to be honest. He's a guy that, in that range, I honestly was just so into like Zaven Collins and Jabril Cox that I spent a lot more time watching them, admittedly. I do think that he possesses a lot of ability to play that modern linebacker role where he's going to be quick enough to hold his own in coverage, but he's also not so undersized that he's going to be abused in the run game. So I do like that a lot. I just get really hesitant of guys that just shoot up draft boards like this out of nowhere because they pan out sometimes. But to me, a lot of times there's a recency bias that gets overlooked for their entire body of work. And with Davis, exactly. And I'm not doubting him. I'm not saying that he can't do these things. I would feel much more confident for where he's being slated to go in the late first, early second, which is what I keep seeing. I'd feel so much better taking a Zaven Collins or Jabril Cox that it would, unless they were off the board already, it wouldn't even really be a second thought for me. But I do think that the biggest thing for me is that he possesses the speed and he has the size to not be abused in the pass or the run game. And that for me is what I look for in a modern linebacker, is a guy that can play that hybrid role that you can throw in the slot and isn't going to get abused by tight ends, can cover running backs out of the backfield. And the other thing I will say too is, as much as I hate the whole like SEC superiority complex that a lot of those people that come out of those schools or, alum from those schools have, I really do think that we have to give them credit for the fact that they are consistently putting out more 5-star athletes than like the Big Ten is the only other conference that really comes close. And Davis was at a school that he wasn't surrounded by other 5-star talent, and he was going up against consistently other teams that had 5-star recruits and elite level players. And he more than held his own on a Kentucky team that wasn't awful, but they definitely weren't the cream of the crop of the SEC. So I think that is one thing that definitely does need to go in consideration in his favor, that he was the guy that was kind of on an island on a defense that, again, wasn't awful, but it wasn't like he was just surrounded by a bunch of great players and it was enhancing his play so much because he was in such a good situation. And he does deserve a lot of credit for how good he looked in that sense.
Yeah, and when when all that buzz kind of popped up about his testing, which was really impressive, you can tell he's a very athletically gifted human being for his size, and his testing is a clear indication of that. So when I turned on the tape, it's not Zaven Collins-esque. Zaven Collins is just different. I don't know if I've ever really seen anyone like Zaven Collins before, with that size and ability. But with Jamin, you could tell he is able to play in coverage. He's able to play in the box. He's able to come downhill, go sideline to sideline. He shows that range of ability. The testing shows up on tape where you can see it actually translate to the field. So I think he's going to be a pretty decent linebacker. I'm not going to put him above Zaven or anything like that. But he's, of course, not going to be in consideration for the 49ers based on where he's being taken. But I think Jamin Davis offers he's someone that I think is intriguing for the right reasons. Because he's another one of those hype guys that I was like, oh, here we go. Another hype guy. And, I was actually pleasantly surprised by some of his tape. So I didn't do too much. I didn't do a deep dive because, again, it's not a fit. It's not a fit based on where we're drafting him. So I did my first impression, took a look. I was like, okay, there's a little bit something there. So we'll see where that plays out. If he sneaks into the first, I don't see him necessarily sneaking into the first because a lot of these media mocks, they don't rank offensive linemen in as high as regards to positional needs as teams do. So there's always going to be guys that are going to slide out based on where all these offensive line go, guards, tackles. There's a good tackle class to be right there at the bottom of that first round. But speaking about that, Wavy Marcos on Instagram asked, do you think, or do we think, that there's any possibility that Caleb Farley falls out of the first and into the second and slides right into the 49ers lap at 43? Do you think that is possible? And if it is possible, Jordan, you're on the clock at pick 43. Do you take Caleb Farley, or is the back injury, the surgery within the last couple months, the second back surgery since he opted out in 2020, does that cause you concern at pick 43?
No, if I was at 43, I would do it, and I will double down and say if he was still there at 33, I would get on the phone and I would try to move up a little bit to get him, because my biggest thing with Caleb Farley is that he is just such a phenomenal prospect in the sense of he's, for his size and his strength, in my opinion, really comes down to his closing speed on the ball. I saw this guy where it looked like the receiver had a step or two on him. He looked beat, should have been a walk-in touchdown, and his closing speed to the ball, insane to me. So I had him as corner one for a very long time. The only reason I really took him down was because I think that the injury is kind of a cause for concern. But if we're going purely based on skill and the tape that I watched, he's by far the best corner in this draft, in my opinion. Having said that, I think that there is a avenue for concern with the fact that he does have that back injury, and this is where I could see. So I know the question was, do you think there's a scenario where he slides? Excuse me. Yes, I do. I think that it's because this year teams haven't really been able to get the normal medical history that they would get. They don't have the access to these guys with their physicians and their medical staff that they normally would. And I think a lot of teams are going to be hesitant to throw a first-round pick away. Or I don't say throw, but risk throwing away a first-round pick on a guy that they draft whose back just never gets right. We've seen, it's different player, different circumstances, but we saw with Jalen Hurd, what started as a very minor back injury ended up really removing him from his entire rookie season. Still has problems because of it, and it's something that when you've played, Brad, when you have back injuries, that's something that's very hard to overlook because they have the potential to linger there forever. But having said that, the 49ers are taking quarterback at 3. We're pretty much, know they're taking quarterback at 3. What's their immediate positional need beyond that? There isn't really one that I'm looking at where it's like, hey, they have to fill this position. They have to get this guy. And if you could take a guy like Farley and have him end up panning out, and you're getting him at 33, 43, somewhere in that early second round, the the risk is huge, but the reward could be even bigger. And that's a situation where, again, you wouldn't have to throw him out immediately. You could wait and make sure that that back has the time to heal. You get him in, you get him rehabbing with a professional medical staff, and then maybe 2022 rolls around, he's starting to look a little bit better. All of a sudden, if Jason Verrett ends up walking, you're in a really good position financially because you can just slot Caleb Farley in there, who I believe has a higher ceiling than Jason Verrett. And again, that's no disrespect to Jason Verrett. It's how good I think Caleb Farley is. So, yes, I do think there's a scenario where he could slide into that early second round. All the way to 43, I think might be tough. And, yes, if he was there, I would do whatever it would take to move up to get him, because I think that it's just a situation where you're swinging and you're taking this huge risk on the quarterback. Why not do the same thing at corner? What are you really losing at that point? You know, if he ends up not panning out, it is what it is. You have 7 other picks in this draft. Beyond that, again, they're in later rounds. I get it. But it's not like you're sitting here and it's the only pick you have for the next, year, where you're like, hey, I have to make sure that this is a safe pick where this guy's going to be a starter. They will be okay if he doesn't play at all year one. And the reward beyond that is just too great to pass up.
I agree, and I've been monitoring this situation pretty closely because Caleb Farley was one of my first draft crushes of this offseason. He was a player I gravitated to really quickly, especially when the conversation was between Caleb Farley, J.C. Horn, and Patrick Surtain. It didn't take me long to land on Farley and really kind of fall in love with this game and what he's able to do from a traits perspective. It's really unfortunate what's going on with the back. But from everything I've heard, from what he's mentioned and what he's discussed since having the back surgery, the timetable for recovery is 4 months. That puts him ready to be able to at least be back and active by the time the season starts. And so, like you said, if there's a situation, and to keep going on the medical, per him, so take it for what it's worth, his doctor said it's healed exactly as it should have, and everything is headed in the right direction, exactly as it should. So there wasn't any setbacks or anything like that. So that's what we like to hear. So we'll take it. And if he finds himself right there at pick 43 for the 49ers, and he's available, I agree. You said you trade up. I would trade up as well. I would take him. At that value. The value is absolutely insane because I almost feel like he's in his own tier. If he was healthy, he would be tier 1. I would personally put Surtain and JC on tier 2, but he's just different like that because of his traits. You mentioned some of his ability. His speed turn, like when he gets beat, it doesn't matter. He can get his hips completely twisted going in the wrong direction because the wide receiver beat him off with the first initial step. He can recover every single time. He's like he's almost feels like he's unbeatable at times because of his recovery speed, because of his ability and his traits to be able to recover, which makes that really difficult for anyone, because if he's doing his proper technique and he's not getting beat, you're clamped. Like it's a really hard situation based on all the traits that he has going for him. So if Caleb Farley falls, I would be absolutely in love with that selection and that possibility of him falling to the 49ers at 43. But Niners Centrals wants to know, and I think I know the answer to this, Jordan. When do you take Rondale Moore at 43?
I would, and again, my only issue with Rondale Moore is that he's 5'7", and there is not very much historical precedent for a guy that small being that successful. Steve Smith was one of the smaller wide receivers that had tremendous success, and he was 5'9". So you have to consider that. And again, even with my bias, I have to take into account that, hey, 5'7" is pretty small for a guy in the NFL. But I think that the biggest thing that we can take away from it is the fact that if he was going to go to anybody in the NFL and have that success at that size, it's Kyle Shanahan. If Kyle Shanahan gets his hands on a guy that's this dynamic with that kind of speed, that kind of toughness, and just that kind of shiftiness, especially in the open field, running these fly sweeps, jet motions, reverses, all these things that he's done with Deebo already, it provides an avenue to them having another insurance policy should Deebo get hurt, and then just having an added dynamic weapon If he's there, I would have him returning punts and kicks as well. I'd get the ball in his hands as much as possible. I'm not comparing him to Tyreek Hill, but I would use him in a very similar way that Kansas City uses Tyreek Hill, where, again, you're just maximizing the amount of times that the football ends up in his hands, because when the ball is in his hands, generally good things happen. I would do it without even thinking twice. But, again, I would understand the hesitance because he is 5'7". I just think that at a certain point, we have to respect the fact that while he may be that small, he does not play like it. And ultimately the results are what matters. And that guy literally had an entire offense based around him at Purdue, where the defense knew, hey, this ball's going to go to this guy. We literally just need the game plan to stop it. And then, David Bell's good too. We'll get into him next year, a little bit more.
My guy.
He really is in a spot where it would amplify the offense to what they already have now. And then if Debo were to miss time as he has last season, and we saw how much of a drop off the offense really had when he did miss time, I think Rondale Moore would be more than adequate enough to come in and fill in for Debo and do a lot of the same things that they ask him to do. And then you start getting very creative where you're motioning these guys pre-snap. Maybe you throw Debo in the backfield for a play. You have Rondale in this very similar formation in the backfield in the next. You're just going to be able to throw a lot more looks at a defense. And again, if you have time, watch his highlights on YouTube. I know not everybody has access to all 22, so go watch some of his stuff on YouTube, wherever you get, your videos. His ability in the open field is absolutely nuts. The shiftiness that this guy runs with and his ability to run through people is absolutely insane. Nobody that small should be that fast while being that tough at the same time. It blows my mind, and he's been one of my favorite players for years, and I still, my jaw drops watching some of these plays. His big breakout game was Ohio State 2018, so if anybody has time, I highly recommend go to YouTube, type in Rondale Moore, Ohio State. It'll probably come up, and watch the way that he ran through a defense littered with NFL caliber players. Okuda was in that secondary. I believe Shaun Wade was in that secondary as well, who's probably going to be drafted this year. It's a guy that has produced at a high level in a tough conference. And again, the size is the only thing that would really hold me back. But at a certain point, it's like, that was that old cliche saying, like, it's not the size of the dog in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Like, he exemplifies that tremendously, in my opinion.
And I would have to agree, too. I'm someone who is quick to not worry about the size. As long as you can play, I feel like you can play. If you can play at that level at 5'7", you can play at the NFL in 5'7". There's been instances where it's done before. You just have to be built the right way. And I think Rondale Moore is built exactly the right way to be successful in the NFL at his size. And with all the traits that he brings to the table, he would be another great fit for the 49ers. I think someone in the chat said Rondale is a smaller and quicker Debo. You've made that likeness before because of how hard-nosed and tough he runs with the ball in his hands. He's a guy that is electric in many different avenues, whether he has the ball or he doesn't, whether he's trying to get open and do things of that nature. Rondale Moore is someone that I think will be successful in the NFL. Not necessarily worried too much about his size, especially if you get him in a right situation that's going to maximize what he has to bring to the table. But let's say Jimmy Garoppolo is traded. You think there's any chance, with the Falcons sitting there at 4, right behind us, if he really wants Mac Jones, that being Kyle Shanahan, do you think there's an opportunity out at all here to maybe drop back a spot, somehow package some additional compensation, grab Julio, and still get the quarterback you want? Or are we galaxy-brained to the max?
I mean, again, this is a situation where it's really hard because you know how much Kyle Shanahan loves Julio. He had that famous quote a couple years ago where he said, when you see a guy like Julio Jones, you give up the picks. It doesn't matter what the compensation is. You move whatever you have to. You move heaven and earth to get this guy. But again, he's on the wrong side of 30. He's been injured a lot lately, and I love Julio Jones. The thought of him in this offense is just – we've seen him in this offense. He put up his best years of his career when Kyle Shanahan was there. But the thought of him in red and gold doing that, it would be the best receiver the 49ers have had since Terrell Owens by far, not even remotely close. And it would put them in a position where immediately whatever rookie they end up taking is going to have an insane amount of weapons at their disposal. Who are you as a defense going to stop when you have to account for Kittle? You have to account for Julio, just those two guys. And then you have Debo and Ayuk coming in as well. It would put tremendous strain on whoever they're playing. So in the immediate, it would be great for the next year or two. But I just struggle again to see how they, unless, again, maybe they get 46 from New England for Jimmy somehow, or they get some kind of second round pick this year for Jimmy. If they were able to move both of those for a player like Julio, again, there's guys that you and I really like there. I'd rather see Elijah Molden and De'Ami Brown, or Elijah Molden and Terrace Marshall, because, again, I think you need to maintain that kind of youthful pipeline where you're getting younger guys coming in on rookie deals that are going to be able to supplement those veterans that you're paying the big bucks to in free agency. But it's really hard to say no to a player of Julio's caliber. So is there a situation where I could see it? Yes. And I say that because I think Kyle Shanahan is so enamored with him, and I think that he has that connection to him already. I just personally, if it's me, I would have to set aside my bias and my love for Julio and just say I don't think it's a good idea for the long-term outlook of your franchise. Because, again, if he comes and he ends up getting hurt, or he's only here for a couple of years, it's really hard. But, again, it's also a situation where if they are really going all in for the next year or two with the core they have now, again, it would be a nightmare. I would not be able to sleep for a minute if I was a defensive coordinator and I had to game plan against what the 49ers could trot out. I already would probably feel that way with what they're going to trot out next year. And then you throw Julio in on top of it. Man, it's just – I would understand it. I just personally wouldn't do it myself because, again, I'm thinking 5 years down the road and not the immediate impact it would have.
Yeah, and you have to also think about the contract you're trading for, which is quite hefty in of itself. It's a lot of money. So it'd be interesting. Obviously, if the 49ers trade Jimmy Garoppolo, that frees up about $20 million or so, or however much you free up with that cap space. So there is a potential possibility of shifting some dollars around, but I agree. It would be a lot of fun to have that situation play out in front of us, but maybe not likely. So I see it being talked about in the chat a little bit here. Do you have any thoughts about Jalen Hurd? We have no idea what any updates on him. He's really low key. He stays under the radar. He's not going to come out and post anything. But what do you see for Jalen Hurd? And do you think that his presence on the roster right now has any effect in how they draft?
No, and I think Jalen Hurd at this point, it's an unfortunate situation. Again, he had that back problem and then the ACL tear last season. So I think with Jalen Hurd, I don't think that they're going to count on him with any I don't think they would avoid taking a receiver because they're counting on Jalen Hurd. I don't think that it affects what they're going to do, but I think that it is a situation where his rehab goes well and he's able to bounce back because I think the ACL was kind of just like a freak thing. It wasn't like a connected injury to the back stuff at all. It just, again, it sucks. That's the best way to put it. So I think at that point, you're just kind of expecting him I'm expecting him to not really contribute. And that's not that I'm saying I don't think he can. It's just I'm not going to get my hopes up. And I don't think that the team is building their offense based on the thought that he's going to be back and be 100%. But if he does come back and he can be 80% of what he thought they could be, he can contribute something. He can give them 10, 15 snaps a game. I think that, again, you're playing with house money at that point because we saw them have success even without him. And if they're able to bring him in for a limited role and keep him healthy, it's going to be a big boost to the offense given what he can do. It's just not something that you can really bank on at this point because, again, at a certain point, while the ACL injury was kind of a fluke thing, it's just you haven't been able to count on him to play a regular season snap in 2 years. So it's just kind of foolish to keep going into every season going, well, this is finally the year it's going to happen. I'd much rather be pleasantly surprised than be let down tremendously after expecting it, if that makes sense.
No, I agree. I think there's an opportunity here where the 49ers would be in a much better position to have too much talent in the wide receiver room than not enough. And with Jalen Hurd, he showed so much promise, right? In that preseason game against Dallas and those 2 touchdowns and what he was able to do and what he looked like. It really looked like, Kyle got another one. But unfortunately, injuries have plagued this team quite a bit. Debo is on his way back from foot surgery. So we got to make sure he can stay healthy. We got to make sure Juwan Jennings can stay healthy. He had a really bad hamstring injury last year. So there's a lot of opportunity based on who was available last year, in my opinion, for the 49ers to add more talent to that room this year. And then just have a legitimate, true competition. Obviously, they added Sanu and a couple other guys, but I feel like there's a great opportunity here in this draft to add a couple more pieces. Whether it's in the second round or in the fifth round, there's going to be plenty of places to grab some talent. And I think Kyle will find the guys that he really likes. So although we are hopeful for Jalen Hurd and we really, really wish and really hopeful that he will contribute in 2021, it's just something that we can't count on. It's something that the front office can't bet on at this point. Guy hasn't been available for 2 years. It's time to keep building the roster. And if he contributes, he comes in, he competes and does well and then produces, then we're looking great. And it's not really an issue at that point. And then you just have a young guy who's ready to go in waiting. So it will be, or just filtered in, or you grab like a guy that we both really like in a Demetric Felton who can be used in a running back role, can be used in this hybrid situation and be used all over the place. So you're not pigeonholed into a certain situation. So it will be really interesting to see what happens with that wide receiver room. I feel like there's going to be more talent that is added when this is all said and done. But it will be interesting, to say the least. So let's do a couple more questions here. I think we're about ready to wrap up for tonight. We got a lot to prepare for. It's less than 48 hours until the draft. I'm getting nervous, man. I don't know who they're going to take. I don't know who it's going to be. But we will find out really soon, and you and I are going to be covering that, so that's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to be able to see that all play out live, and it's going to be a situation. But is there anyone? Let's jump back to maybe third or fourth round. Are there any guys that really stick out to you in that range, or maybe a position that sticks out to you in that range? Let's say first round, we're going quarterback. Second round, let's say it's cornerback or wide receiver. Third round, fourth round. Like, what are you kind of thinking if that's how we go in the first two?
I think the third or fourth would be a great spot to add another tight end that would be able to come in and complement what George Kittle does. The two guys that I would look at are Brevin Jordan out of Miami and Tommy Tremble out of Notre Dame. And I think Tremble's very interesting because they lined him up at fullback a lot too, and he did a lot of the same things that Kyle Juszczyk has done. Phenomenal blocker in space, tenacious, tough player, but he can also catch the ball, solid yak guy. And again, he's a guy where do I look at him and do I see a George Kittle or a Rob Gronkowski? No, but I see a guy that could be a starting tight end, particularly in those two tight end sets, and would bring tremendous versatility. Or you have a hypothetical scenario where you could line up Juice in line, you could put Juszczyk in the slot, and then you have Tremble in the backfield, vice versa. And again, you're keeping defenses honest by moving these guys around and not putting them in a specific spot. Because again, the one thing that really gives defenses the advantage in this league is when you're finding success doing the same things over and over again. It's very easy to identify because these guys get paid to watch hundreds of hours of tape every season, these defensive players, the staff, coaches, all that stuff. And if you're able to constantly keep them guessing by having multiple guys who can do similar things and rotate them around, it's going to give you a much better advantage than if you're just running. Like, Kyle's so good and that offense is so good, they can kind of run the same play a lot of times and it's going to keep working. But ultimately, it's not going to. And I think the perfect example, as we saw in that Super Bowl, was they started running that Debo reverse. It looked great in the first half, but as they got into the second half, a lot of that motion and that action, that not the particular play itself, but the motion they were showing, Kansas City adapted to and was able to start loading the box a little bit, and they were able to kind of force them to throw the ball, which, as we know, didn't work out very well. So I think it'd be good to add another guy like that that's a dynamic weapon that could complement the passing game but isn't going to be a receiver. Again, I'm not big on taking running backs early, but I do really like Michael Carter. If he was there in round 3, I think that he would do a lot of things that the Niners thought Jerick McKinnon might do when they signed him, particularly in the pass game. So that's kind of what I would look at. I think that there's not really a guy that's like an edge player that I'm looking at in that range. If Patrick Jones from Pittsburgh was still there, I would consider him. I really like him. But I'm more so just looking at this offense. I think the defense will be more than okay, to be honest. I think the offense, just keep adding skill position players, keep adding playmakers, make life as easy as possible for whoever you're taking at 3, particularly if you're keen on moving Garoppolo and you're having a depth chart that's going to be the rookie and Josh Rosen. And, I wouldn't be surprised if Mullins comes back, but as of now, I think Josh Johnson and Sudfeld are the other guys on the roster. So offense is what I'd be doing for the first 3 to 4 rounds. So I would say tight end and maybe running back. And again, it would have to be the right guy. But I think there are guys that you could justify the value. And I'd feel much better about taking a Michael Carter at 102 than I would trading up to 23 or 24 and taking Najee, even though I think Najee is a substantially better player. It's just the value. It's what it comes down to.
Yeah, and I agree. And like maybe if you want kind of that big bruising type back, you want to go Trey Sermon in round 4. That could be a potential opportunity if that's kind of where you were going. It's going to be interesting to see where guys like Chaz Sarah go. His range has been all over the place, but if he slides back to the 3rd, I would definitely still add some pieces to that defense. I've been enamored with Ellerson Smith out of NIU for quite some time now. That all started at the Senior Bowl and has just kind of stuck with me ever since. And as I watched the tape afterwards, he just seems like a guy that I really, really like. He's like 6'5", 6'6", 250 pounds. He's huge. He's just big, dude. At the Senior Bowl, amongst all these D1 guys, Ellerson Smith is one of those guys where your eyes immediately go to, but he was able to back it up, and he was able to go out and do a lot of things. He was able to be dominant within the run game. He shows he has a great hands punch, and he's able to use his leverage. And he's not so tall and high that he allows the offensive linemen to get into him. He shows like a good bag of pass rush moves. So I really like Ellerson Smith a lot out of NIU. He's a small school kid, but I think he has the traits, and he really, really looks like a solid guy. Of course, we've talked about Kendrick Green before being in that 3rd, 4th range, a guy that I would absolutely love to have on the squad. Jalen Darden, we've talked about, Divine Diablo. You can start getting – there's going to be guys that you can have in this area that are going to be solid. Trey Smith, even if you wanted kind of like another more depth in offensive line, a guy who can play guard, a guy who can play tackle, and move seamlessly. I think he would be I think he's a raw offensive lineman. I think he shows promise, and I think if you get him with the right technique, you could really make Trey Smith a lot better of an offensive lineman than what he is. A guy that I'm really excited and don't know where he's going to go, it's Rashad Weaver, because I've seen his ranked all over the place. And that's you talked about Patrick Jones. Rashad Weaver was his teammate at Pitt. I would say Rashad Weaver made much more of an impression to me than Jones at Senior Bowl. But again, that's a one situation. But with Rashad Weaver, I still have this fascination with getting more edge help. I know we brought in Samson Ebukam. D Ford's supposed to be coming back. We've added some other guys, but I still have this fascination with getting more edge talent. And I think if you can stack edge in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th based on some of these guys that are available, I think that would be a lot of fun. And you could really get them in the mix with some of these guys. Ellerson Smith is a guy I think you could play in base down situations. You can move him inside to the 3 tech if you really needed to. So there's some guys in the 3rd round that I really like. But before we wrap this up here, Kobe asked, he wants to know, Jordan, Amon-Ra St. Brown, USC wide receiver. Would you draft him, and where do you – because I answered this question already, but where do you kind of think he slots in, and when would you draft him?
Honestly, I'd be okay taking him at 43. I think Amon is a guy that, while he's not going to blow you away physically like some of the guys that might go ahead of him, I just think that he's very solid. He runs a full route tree. He has good hands. And the biggest thing for me is he's a willing blocker. He's put some plays on tape where he's putting guys on their ass. Like he's picking up defensive backs and throwing them on their back during run plays. And it's not oh, I'm doing this because the coach called the play. It's like a George Kittle level. No, I'm doing this because I love football and I'm going to run through the guy in front of me because it's going to help my team out. And I could see Kyle being very enamored with a guy that's willing to sacrifice their body for run plays like that and put himself out there for a play that's not going to net him any statistics. He's not touching the ball. And again, you'd like to think that most guys would be like that, but there's a large faction of NFL wide receivers that not only aren't willing blockers, but aren't very good at it. And he is both. He checks both those boxes. And again, he's a good player. I saw a comp to him that I don't know if I agree necessarily, but I kind of liked it. It was Brian Hartline. I don't know if any of you remembers him from the Dolphins. Again, where he wasn't this, phenomenal physical talent, but he had a couple games where he was catching 15, 16 balls. Like, he put up solid numbers in Miami with so-so quarterback play at the time. And I think that Amon is a guy that would kind of be a safe pick, if that makes sense. And again, there's no guarantee that the guy's going to translate, but I think he's a guy where if we're getting into that cliche realm of lower ceiling, higher floor, that's where I see him. But I also see a path where he could be better than the ceiling that I might be putting on him currently. I just don't know that I would feel great if, like, let's say De'Ami Brown or Terrace Marshall or one of those guys was on the board. I would rather have them, but I think that there's a lot to be said for, again, taking a guy that's going to give you a willing run blocker and who also I would feel much safer isn't going to be a bust at the next level, if that makes sense. Like, I think the probability of him being a bust is significantly lower than Terrace Marshall, where I think Terrace Marshall has a much higher ceiling in the range of outcomes, where I think he could be a superstar all-pro level player. I don't really see that with Amon-Ra, but again, at a certain point, not every single player you have is going to be a superstar. You need guys that are just going to be reliable starters in the NFL, and I definitely think Amon is capable of doing that.
Yeah, I agree. I'm big on Amon. I think he's going to be a guy who's a little bit slept on throughout this process, and if he lands in the right spot with the right opportunity, I think he can show some stuff in the NFL. It's definitely going to be a big-time dynasty target for me, probably in those third, fourth rounds of those rookie drafts. I would love to add him onto my squad. So with that being said, we'll end it there with that question, with our draft question for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow again. It's going to be tomorrow night is Draft Miss Eve. It's time. It's here. It's almost here. The stress is mounting. The anxiety is mounting. It's all happening. So we'll be here to cover it all and discuss it all. Jordan, before we break, is there anything that you want to head out on?
Yeah, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to 49ers Focus. What's up, dude? Glad to see you.
49ers Focus, the homie. He's a big Simi Fecco guy out of Stanford. He was the one who actually put me on to him. But yeah, so we'll go ahead and wrap this up here today. And then get ready to come back for a jam-packed day tomorrow. We're going to be talking a lot of stuff tomorrow because it's the primer ahead of the draft. And then again, Jordan and I will be live for the entire draft to do analysis, reactions, cry, laugh, do it all. We will be here to experience this with you. If you care to experience with us, we would love to have you. So for tonight, we'll call it wraps and get out of here. But again, thank you to everyone for hopping on and listening to us, and we'll get at it tomorrow. Appreciate you hopping on, Jordan.
Thank you. Thanks everybody who watched too. I had a good time doing it.
All right. Thanks, guys.